Deontay Wilder versus Artur Szpilka. It's Sunday morning here in the UK. I've just sat down and watched the fights, caught up on the action for last night. I'm going to go into the Wilder-Szpilka fight in some detail. I've made a few notes that I want to bring up having watched it. Before I do that, just two quick things. For those who haven't seen it yet, after the fight, Tyson Fury gets in the ring and you see some of the most hilarious post-fight build-up you'll see in some long time. It involves Tyson Fury taking off his suit jacket, throwing it on the floor. He's wearing a ridiculous tie where the fat bit is this long and the thin bit is this long. And it really is comedy gold. I hope that fight gets made. Secondly, I want to give credit to Artur Szpilka. You know, he lost. He was behind on my scorecard. He got stopped badly, a bad knockout in the 9th round. But he performed with immense credit. And this was a career best performance in loss. Credit also to his trainer, Ronnie Seals. I saw tremendous improvement in Szpilka tonight and excellent tactics at times. You know, Szpilka's still a young fighter. He's got 2 losses on his record, but he's got good people around him. You know, Al Heyman, Ronnie Seals, and if he sticks with it, he can come again and he can still be a top 10, top 15 fighter in the division and have some good fights, I believe. Now, let's talk about the fight itself. Deontay Wilder wins by 9th round KO. It was a very, very competitive fight up to that point. You know, I would have had Deontay Wilder ahead on the scorecards. I believe that would probably be the consensus, but it was really, really competitive action. Szpilka, in many ways, represented a step up from some recent Deontay Wilder bouts. You know, Szpilka, to me, appeared to be a vastly superior opponent to the likes of Molina, to the likes of Johan de Par. He arguably is as good a fighter as Bermane Stiverne after seeing that, and this was potentially one of the most difficult fights, if not the most difficult fight of Deontay Wilder's career. Szpilka was getting very, very low from the southpaw stance. He was throwing quite a lot of head movement. He was showing a lot of angles. He had decent foot movement as well. He was relatively agile for a heavyweight in the ring, especially in the early rounds. And I thought that really caused Deontay Wilder problems getting off his work. You know, Deontay Wilder, in some ways in this fight, and it wasn't quite as bad as this, don't get me wrong, but there were some times he reminded me of Vladimir Klitschko in the Tyson Fury matchup. You know, Klitschko is another fighter who is quite reliant on range, and with Tyson Fury having all that angles, all that movement, all that awkwardness, I felt Deontay Wilder was really, really struggling to find his range and to get started. I mean, in the first round, you will see a number of extremely wild punches. Very, very raw, very, very wild punches from Deontay Wilder. You know, I thought he'd kind of worked on that to an extent. But most famously, like when he was trying to knock out Audley Harrison and came in windmilling. You know, there was a little bit of that crept back in the very first round of this fight. And what I attribute that to is Szpilka's awkwardness, Szpilka getting low, Szpilka moving his head, Szpilka showing angles and moving his feet. You know, Szpilka was an awkward guy, and Deontay Wilder struggled to adjust to that early on in this fight, for my money. I mean, don't get me wrong, he was still winning, but he was making it very, very, very competitive and close rounds that were hard to score at times. Now, Szpilka did well in his awkwardness, but for me, Szpilka is not an elite level fighter. And I was thinking early on, if Wilder is struggling this much against Szpilka, how would he cope against Tyson Fury, who's proven that awkward, elusive style at the very, very top level in the sport? Regardless, Wilder won the early rounds. He was the more active fighter. His punches appeared to have more zip on them. You know, he did do a good job of outworking Szpilka, and his punches were perhaps the clearer, more eye-catching punches in the early rounds. I thought Szpilka really started to come into it early on, sort of rounds 3, 4. And again, it was from that southpaw stance that I really think Wilder didn't seem to enjoy fighting against. It would be something that I'd look for a guy like Tyson Fury to utilise against him, should they ever fight. Szpilka began to back Deontay Wilder up in the 3rd and 4th rounds. And we've always said it here, but Deontay Wilder backs straight up in a straight line with no head movement. But what he was doing today, and you can see this, I mean, it's bizarre to watch, is Szpilka would throw, he'd throw a southpaw jab, and Deontay Wilder would move straight back. He'd kind of jump out of the way, and as he'd do it, it was like he was playing dodgeball. You know, Szpilka would throw the jab, say it was a jab to the body, and Deontay Wilder would go straight back and put his arms up in the air. You know, it was like he was trying to make a big thing about how he could avoid this Szpilka jab, but he was quite literally going like this as he was going back. And if you didn't clock that, you're going to have to re-watch the fight to see how obvious this was. But I couldn't believe my eyes. Numerous times in the early round, Wilder was going straight back like this, and he was getting away with it because Szpilka was throwing single punches. Later on in the fight, what you'll notice is Szpilka started to throw more combinations. He would throw the double jab, he'd throw the jab and then work to the body. And Wilder was going literally straight up like this. And the other thing about Wilder is he was extremely off balance. And I've talked about this a lot in other Wilder videos. His stance is so wide. You know, most people, imagine my arms and legs, most people have a stance like this. Wilder's stance is like this. And because he's so tall and so rangy, it exacerbates the problem. So you've got a guy with legs out like this, a really, really wide stance. Szpilka's backing him up, and he's going back like this, but with his legs apart. And what that means is he is incredibly poorly balanced. And a number of times in this fight, I thought he may be slightly wobbled, or I thought Szpilka may have knocked him back a bit with a punch. When you actually watch it back in slow-mo, Wilder wasn't actually taking that much punishment. What happened is Szpilka would throw a punch and he'd move back and he'd be so ungainly and so out of balance that it looked like he was struggling, but he wasn't actually. It was just like his legs getting caught up, and with his hands going up and his legs being so wide, yeah, it was really, really unnatural, and he was off balance and he was going back in straight lines. And that is why Szpilka, as he came into the fight and as he started to push Deontay Wilder back more and more, was enjoying so much success. Because he started doubling up the southpaw jab and he started throwing to the body off that. And Wilder was very, very, very hittable to the body. Very hittable to the body. Yeah, Szpilka was fighting really nicely. He was having effect when he was pushing Deontay Wilder back. He was making him look uncoordinated, poorly balanced. He also had some success catching Wilder on the way in. You know, that southpaw stance, really Wilder just didn't seem to adjust for it to me. And you know, Wilder, he isn't quite the same fighter on the back foot for me. You know, he looked like a guy who was struggling to find his reins, and he looked like a guy who wasn't punching with the same power on the back foot. You know, for me, he's a big power puncher when coming forward and when throwing bombs. And I think Szpilka in the early rounds took that away from him somewhat. You know, I think it was the 5th round, 6th round. Oh no, actually it's the 8th round, I think. Wilder was getting so, I don't want to use the word frustrated, but he was, you know, he was starting to struggle, and he threw a punch that was so wild, he actually knocked himself off his feet. I mean, have a look in the 8th round. He threw such a wild punch, he lost his balance, and, you know, went down. My worry is, for Wilder, that against a truly elite level fighter, when he opens that gap by losing balance, you know, a world-class heavyweight will just hit him instantly. And I think Szpilka struggled to, you know, catch him at that precise moment. I mean, look at the David Haye fight last night. Don't get me wrong, David Haye's opponent was terrible. But, you know, that Mark Lamori threw one sloppy jab, and David Haye reacted in a 1/10 of a second with an overhand right. You know, my point is, when Wilder fights an elite heavyweight, be that Tyson Fury, be that David Haye, if he's doing this off-balance thing, if he's doing this straight up like this, people's reaction times are a lot quicker, and you're going to see someone catching him and catching him really, really hard. And I just get concerned about Deontay Wilder. I get concerned when there's combinations coming his way. I get concerned when he's punched to the body. You know, I often talk about natural fighters, you know, instinctive fighters, boxers who've been doing this since day dot, you know, been in the gym since they were 4 years old. And you see a real fighter like that, like a Tyson Fury or a Billy Joe Saunders. They're instinctive fighters. They know what to do when hit. Their head's moving. They're not even thinking, but their head is moving. They're leaning back against the ropes with their shoulder up. They're bobbing and weaving. You know, it's in their blood. They don't have to think. Whereas for me, guys like Vladimir Klitschko, guys like Anthony Joshua, guys like Deontay Wilder, you can almost see the clogs in their mind whirring when punches are going back their way, and they don't react so instinctively. You know, they do more of an amateurish thing, which is when the punch is coming, they just step out of the way. You know, their instinct is to evade the initial punch as opposed to worrying about the 3 or 4 that are going to follow on for it. And I just thought he looked quite unnatural when punches were coming his way. I didn't feel his defence was instinctive, and I think that did leave himself open for follow-up punches, you know. It was a good performance in some ways from Wilder. I don't want to be totally harsh on him here, but what I would say is the areas that he struggled in against Szpilka are areas that are going to come up again and again and again as he fights the top heavyweights. Those being backed up in straight lines, you know, not knowing what to do when hit, being very, very open to the body, not being able to judge your range. I mean, if you can't judge your range that well against Szpilka and it's making you throw these mad, wild, raw hooks, how are you going to do it against a guy like Tyson Fury? You know, or a guy like Luis Ortiz, you know, one of those sort of names. For me, it was a flawed performance. The one thing you've got to say about Wilder is the power is still there. I mean, the power probably isn't as frightening as we once thought it may be. You know, there was a spell where everyone he was hitting was going down in the first round, and you know, Szpilka went 9 today. I think he went 10 with Bryant Jennings, and Bryant Jennings isn't the biggest puncher in the world, but when Szpilka got knocked out, it was a hideous knockout, and it was another one of those where, you know, before I uploaded the video, I wanted to check to see if he was alive before posting it, because it was a very, very heavy knockdown. And credit to Deontay Wilder. I often have said in the past that he is a very, very, very basic fighter in the sense that his power is jab, straight right. He's really begun to work on this lead hook. You know, we saw it against Eric Molina. We saw it today against Artur Szpilka. And I think Wilder opponents are so mindful of the big right hand, they kind of forget about other punches so much. And we saw Wilder have effect at one point in the fight with a kind of 45-degree uppercut. We saw him finish the fight with this lead hand hook, sorry. And yeah, he is a genuinely heavy-handed guy. You know, his accuracy isn't always what it could be, but he hits fast, he hits hard, and he has game-changing power. And any opponent who's in there with Deontay Wilder has to be aware of that, because he carries his power late into fights. Look at Molina, look at Depar, look at Szpilka, and this was a brutal knockout. He does have that game-changing power. Thing with Deontay Wilder, the other thing I'll say about Deontay Wilder, actually, in his credit, his chin isn't actually as bad as people say it is. Now, I'm not saying he's got a, you know, necessarily got a George Foreman or a Mike Tyson style chin here. I'm not going to say that he's got one of the best chins in the sport at all. But a lot of the things you read on forums is that his chin is absolute glass, and it really isn't, you know. Bermane Stiverne, Artur Szpilka, they may not be the hardest punchers in the sport, but these are decent punchers. These are guys who knock out heavyweights. And we saw Wilder, again, take shots, cleaned. You know, it wasn't like he stood up to 50 haymakers, but it is not as simple as jab Deontay Wilder and he's going to collapse. He's got a better chin than that. And I think people have underestimated him slightly in that area. I just wonder if he can be outpointed. I just wonder if he leaves himself too open and makes too many rookie mistakes with his inaccuracy, with his wild punches, and with backing up, with allowing himself to be open to combinations and body punches, you know. And I just wonder if up against fast, elite, awkward fighters like the Ortizes and Furies, and I keep mentioning those two because those are the guys who I see giving Wilder the most trouble. Is he going to be able to deal with their awkwardnesses and their stance? You know, it's an interesting one. It's an interesting one. That's my thoughts on the fight. Credit to Wilder for getting the win and getting it in, you know, big style. Credit to Szpilka for a career best performance. Wilder's an improving fighter, but I'm still unconvinced. Let me know your thoughts. If you've enjoyed this, do give me the thumbs up. I'd certainly appreciate it.